And joining us now on the debate, Ann Cavoukian, Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Gord Miller, Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, and Jim McCarter, Auditor General of Ontario. Good to have you three overseers around our table today, and we're going to get right off to a fast start by asking, Ann Cavoukian, what do you do?
I protect your privacy. I protect the privacy of all Ontarians, and I also ensure that you exercise your right to access government-held data, freedom of information. Absolutely critical that the information that the government has is accessible by citizens of this province. And the privacy side is equally as important. Think of health information, financial information. Think of very sensitive records that the government has on you. Very important to protect your privacy. Privacy is the basis of freedom. We need to ensure it stays strong.
Gord Miller, what do you do?
Well, the Environmental Commissioner is governed by the Environmental Bill of Rights, which allows the people of Ontario to participate in government decision-making as respect to the environment and energy conservation, and I oversee to make sure that people have that right.
Jim McCarter, what do you do?
I guess, Steve, it should come as no surprise, given an Auditor General's office, we do audits, but probably what would be a surprise is we don't focus on financial audits, auditing the books, auditing the accounts. What we do is, our primary job is we do value for money audits where we'll go into hospital emergency rooms, we'll go into children's aid societies, we'll go into long-term care homes, we look at our bridges being inspected and maintained. You might have heard of the government's e-health strategy or the renewable energy strategy. What we're trying to do is provide the legislature and the public with information on, are we getting a good bang for our buck?
Ann Cavoukian, why did they create your office in the first place?
The growth of information technologies, the web, cloud computing, I mean, think of all these dramatic changes in the last 10, 20 years. Information just creeps out. Data leakage is growing, and there is such a need to alert the public, what the problems are. So part of my most important mandate is educating the public about privacy issues, but also with government departments, how they have to guard like Fort Knox your personal information. You know, people have this notion of, well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's about the state, the government is permitted to collect some information about you that you're required by law to give to them. They in turn have a duty of care to protect that information and only release it for the purposes for which it was intended. Very narrow. We try to ensure that they do that, and we enforce compliance with our privacy laws.
Gord, why did they create your office?
Well, the focus of the legislation, Environmental Bill of Rights, was really about transparency and accountability in government decision-making as it relates to the environment. It may shock people to learn that sometimes the government just doesn't talk about certain things that are very important in the environment or doesn't really disclose how they arrive at certain decisions. And the EBR is designed to open that up. Let's hold the government accountable, have mechanisms to put things that are important about the environment up on the public policy agenda, so they have to respond. They may not be able to fix them, but they have to respond. And when they do make a decision, we want to know who made that decision and how are we going to hold, who do we hold accountable if it goes wrong?
Was it Bob Rae's government in the 90s that created your office?
It was.
It was, okay. Jim McCarter, your office has been around for more than just 20 years.
Yeah, we've probably go back probably a good century, Steve. I think we were initially created, an auditor, to check the books. But I think, especially in the last couple of decades, we've really gone from checking the books. What we found is the members of Parliament, the public, what they want to know primarily is our health care, our education, our social services, all the services that government delivers. Are we getting good services for the money that we're spending? We found they're much more interested in that. That's where we tend to focus our attention.
You are all hired by the Premier of the day, right? Essentially.
No, actually, no.
Well, hang on. Hang on.
Wrong.
I'm not saying who you report to.
No.
I know you report to the legislature, but
They
the
don't
guy
hire us. All party committees hire us, consisting of all three political parties.
That's right.
And for me, it's a competitive process. The selection committee is comprised of members of all three parties, and you have to be voted on in the House. And I know in my process, I basically said, I told them, unless I have unanimous support in the House, I'm not going to accept the job.
Unanimous support?
I asked.
Absolutely.
I basically said that during my interview.
Did
I
you
said
get
if
it?
I don't, I got unanimous support. And if I
all
didn't,
three?
if you only have one party and the other two parties don't want you, I'm not sure you'd want the job, Steve.
Huh.
All three of us sit with unanimous support of the House. However, when I was first appointed, it was a 3-day filibuster.
I remember that, actually. Do you want to go back to that? That was funny. I don't know. I'm sort of jumping ahead here, Michael, because we were actually going to get to this. But where is this clip here? you want to go? I remember the first time you were in this studio was probably about 11 years ago. Michael, I'm on the bottom of page 4 right now. Okay, remember this. Roll tape, please. When you were hired, there was a bit of an uproar. Well, there was a lot of an uproar, actually, about your previous Conservative Party activism. And I wonder whether you have been tougher on the Harris government in this report in order to prove to all those critics that you're not Mike's lapdog, which was the allegation when you got the gig in the first place. Oh boy, that was a nasty question, wasn't it? But let's do the background here. You were a former Conservative Party candidate. You were hired by a Conservative government. People in the opposition parties were not thrilled when you got the job because they thought you were going to be Mike's lapdog. I was hired by an all-party committee, but in those days, the all-party committees were stacked according to representation in the legislature. So, in fact, there was a Tory majority on the committee, right? And it came up in the interview questions, and they said, "Are you late?" And actually, there were 3 rounds of interviews, and on the last round, the 3rd round, so I was down to a small number of people, and they asked me if I was a member of any political party, if I ever run for office, and I said, yes. I thought, given that the member I ran against was in the legislature. And who was that? Gilles Bisson.
Oh,
okay, you ran up north. Timmins, James Bay.
And so I didn't think it was a particular secret, but it obviously was a revelation to opposition members on the thing and on the committee, and it sort of blew up from there. And then it did become partisan up till the 3 levels of interviews, and there was no partisan activity up to that stage, but in the end it became a debate in the House. But this is the key. I mean, you 3 have to have kind of the good housekeeping seal of approval from all of the parties in the legislature, or what? You can't really do your work, can you?
We can't do our work, but also you want to ensure that you are not viewed as being partisan. You're not at the Premier's beck and call, because often we are in a position where we have to criticize the government of the day. All of us have done that and will continue to do that. Having said that, we work very closely with the government. We always prefer to consult with them and work out solutions in a way that is productive. At times, it can't work that way, and we have to do investigations. We issue orders. I have order-making power, and I have to order the government to do things and be critical.
Well, that's what I wonder about, Jim. Can you effect change more effectively by working sort of quietly behind the scenes with ministers, bureaucracies, the Premier's office, or is it better to just embarrass the hell out of them with a massive headline someday?
I think it's maybe a bit of both. You have to work with them, but sometimes you can work with them all you want, but change doesn't happen. However, I don't think it's the job of an officer to go out and try to embarrass the government. No. But by the same token, when things aren't working properly, I think an officer has to be fair, but you have to have the backbone to call a spade a spade. But I think you have to be careful with the hyperbole and going too far and exaggerating, because we have a lot of clout as officers of the legislature. So, we have to be credible and fair and objective.
Now, you say you have a lot of clout, but I mean, at the end of the day, you can't affect policy. Right? You recommend, but it's up to the government to do it. I mean, whether the Environmental Commissioner of New Zealand had a great line that I use sometimes. When faced with the criticism, Commissioner, you have no teeth, he says, yes, but I have very strong gums. And it comes down to that in the sense that, they can and should do what they think is right for the people of Ontario. But I want to make sure in the case of the environment that all considerations are on the table. Here is the effect on the environment. Here are the consequences long term. When everybody knows that, you make your decision, and you will be accountable on that basis. That's fine, and I'm comfortable with whatever decision you make, as long as it's been fully discussed. Jim, we saw in Ottawa, the Federal Conservatives kind of ran afoul of the parliamentary budget officer, and they attacked him, they tried to cut his budget, they did a lot of things. Does that happen to you ever?
I have to be honest, I think I've been treated very well by the government and the legislature. For instance, since I've come in, I've had my value for money mandate expanded. When I came in, we couldn't go into hospitals, universities, school boards. Now we can basically go into everything and do value for money auditing. The government can't even run an advertisement unless I approve it. Nobody else in the world basically has to go through that. I was on your show a while ago talking about the pre-election report, where the government makes a fiscal forecast. We go in and we say, listen, is it reasonable or is it pie in the sky? So I'd have to say, for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the powers that they've given me. I wonder about that. And if you bring out something that says the government is abusing your privacy and it, potentially embarrasses the government of the day, do they take you out to the woodshed privately, or how does that? What happens?
we've had great success. I'll give you an example. And also, we all have different powers. So I have order-making power. So I can order a government department to do something or not do something. Several years ago, there was a jury vetting case where there were a number of cases where Crown attorneys and particular locales, jurisdictions, were selecting juries in a way that was considered to be improper. I was asked to investigate. And in fact, we saved this province, you'll be happy to know, millions of dollars, I'm sure, because the Premier was being called upon to call a royal commission to do their hearings, takes years, et cetera, costs a lot of money. And he said, let's wait until the commissioner's report is out. And if you're not happy with that, to the lawyers and Law Society and others, then we'll consider the Royal Commission. We worked very hard over 3.5 months over the summer, and we issued a very comprehensive jurors report where we were critical of the government. We said, you're not doing this properly. We want you to change your process and change the Juries Act.
And what flack did you get?
No flack.
Come on, no one will believe that.
Are you kidding? I met with the Attorney General and with the Solicitor General before I released a report. I said, here's the report. It's very critical of what you've been doing, but here's the fix. We also give a solution. We don't just give the credit. We said the fix is you amend the process so that instead of 55 different jurisdictions, Crown Attorney's offices, deciding how they're going to select juries, they centralize it in one central process. And you amend the Juries Act, and we gave them the language. They loved it. All of a sudden.
They loved it?
Well, let me say, I don't want to put words in their mouth. They accepted it very graciously and then made the recommendation, followed it. They implemented. But I've got to tell you one other thing. I'm very grateful to this man here. Why? We don't have auditors in my team. And one of the things I wanted to do was audit the practices of selection of these Crown Attorney's offices. I wanted to send teams in and actually audit what they were doing. I didn't have the staff to do that.
And I have to tell you, when I issue my reports, I don't get a lot of love.
Well, you're getting it here. You are getting it here. I thank you so much for that.
Well, just two things. First of all, I've been commissioner through 3 premiers and 2 quite different governments, and I have never ever been in any way compromised or even the slightest suggestion of influence or consideration. Sometimes they're not happy, it's true, but they tough it up and accept it. And I think part of it, which is good and it's the way it should be, part of it goes back to the fact we are covered by parliamentary privilege. If it to mislead us to in any way interfere with our duties is an affront, a formal affront to the legislature of Ontario. And so we are true officers of the legislature, and we stand under that umbrella, as it were, and everybody respects it.
I want to bring up a few names right here, and we're going to call this graphic Tried, Tested, and True. Reader's Digest did a survey on whom the public trusts the most in this country. This is for 2011. Number 1, you probably won't be surprised to hear, David Suzuki. Number 2, Mike Holmes. Have a TV show. But here's number 3, Sheila Fraser.
Yep.
The Auditor General of the country was number 3. Number 4, Michael J. Fox. Okay. Number 5, Lloyd Robertson. Lloyd would have been higher on my list, but there you go. Okay, Jim McCarter, I mean, that's your former federal counterpart. Yep. What do you think explains the fact that let's face it, she is a behind-the-scenes bureaucrat who's not on TV every night most of the time, and she's the 3rd most trusted person in the country? How come?
I think what I said before, I think as auditors, we do have a fair bit of clout, and I think the public is looking for someone to help them out. With respect to the government and the public services, how do we know that we're getting what we're paying for? Because we pay a tremendous amount of money every year in taxes, and I think the public wants to know, are we getting a good level of service? And here we've got somebody that basically can't be fired by the Premier. The Premier can't pick up the phone and fire any of us. Can't happen. And so we can call a spade, and we're basically going to bat for you, the taxpayer, and I think the taxpayers appreciate that.
Gord, the public apparently trusts you as oversight officers. But do you think the public actually pays attention to your work?
It's interesting because I often do sort of a poll survey when I'm speaking to large audiences. How many people do you know what the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario does? And generally around 5%, maybe in a good audience gets up to 10. But what I've noticed, I think, is that people pay attention to what we do when they're engaged in some issue that we're involved in. You know, when there's a serious environmental issue, all of a sudden the environmental commissioner, yeah, that's the guy, and you know, and they're very involved and interested, and it falls off when their life isn't impacted by environmental stuff. I would suggest for Anne as well, information and privacy stuff is very important to people when they feel their own privacy threatened. But then after that, it's, oh, isn't there somebody? What's her name? You know, so we're not high profile in the sense that we're constantly like Mike Holmes before you all the time. But when they feel a need to, you know, to seek the sort of involvement or protection of our legislation, they find out who we are.
Does the public pay attention to what you do?
You know, it's remarkable. I would be surprised at how much contact we have with the public. So we have thousands of cases, like formal appeals and privacy complaints over the year. But we have our intake function fields thousands of calls from the public. They're confused. Their health information's at issue, or there's this problem or that. What can they do? Where should they go? We do a lot of that kind of contact. Also, I do a lot of public speaking. I think I gave like 55 speeches last year, and this is. The mandate to educate is probably one of the most important things that we do, because people are, there's a thirst for information. There's all their information is floating out. They're worried about identity theft. They're worried about what are all these technologies doing to my mobile cell? What am I doing? So we take that very seriously, and we have a lot of contact with the public. I think they know what we do. Despite
what you all say, you are somewhat in the political crosshairs in doing your job. And I want to read something here that was in the Ottawa Citizen. This was during the, let's call it, uncertain reappointment process for André Marin when he was going for the ombudsman job again. And here's the way it was reported in the Ottawa Citizen back in May of 2010. The McGuinty government is raising questions about the competence of Ontario's ombudsman as a competition to fill the post is about to resume. Government insiders are sniping at Marin's financial management of his office, noting particularly the decision to relocate from one downtown Toronto address to another. The move involved extensive renovations, one Liberal said. The Liberals also suggest Marin is claiming frequent travel to his Ottawa home as a work expense. The allegations follow a widely circulated anonymous letter written by a purported employee accusing Marin of allowing a toxic work environment to flourish. Here's the quote. "It's clear that this government wants André Marin out of the job," Conservative MPP John Yakubuski said. "They don't want a watchdog, they want a lapdog." Jim, does your public popularity make you a target from time to time?
I have to say probably not. I think I'm interested in the quote because sometimes when people ask me to explain where do you stand, I think the government would probably maybe want their Auditor General to be a bit of a lapdog, whereas the two opposition parties would like the Auditor General to be an absolutely ferocious pit bull. So to some extent, I think, you know, being a responsible officer, it's finding that right balance. But I'd have to say, you know, I constantly get, you know, opposition leaders, opposition members, you know, formally asking me to do work. The government may not necessarily want me to do the work, but at least I have the independence. I can do what I want, when I want, how I want it.
So if opposition members come to you and say, can you follow this lead?
Happens all the time.
And you do it? Not
necessarily. Usually what we would say is under the Audit Act, I can only do work if it's requested by the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. And I'm lucky. I'm the only officer that actually has a standing committee of the legislature, and they devote all their time to holding hearings on my report. So they can request that it's an all-party committee, or if a minister or the premier requests that I can do it. But generally, if I get a request, I think I had one a week or so ago from the leader of the NDP asking me to look at the cancellation of the gas turbine plants. While we would take that into consideration, we would generally not do that work unless it's voted on by the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
How about you? Can you follow?
I have a lot more latitude. I don't have a standing committee, you're right, and it would be nice to have one, but my legislation specifically lists on what I must report to the legislature on, and then has a general clause saying, and I may report at my discretion on matters that I feel important to the legislature. So I have the flexibility to pick and choose. You know, they limit you by resources. I mean, you know, I'm one of the smaller officers, so I can't just leap on every thing, but I have the discretion to pursue any ideas or any concerns I have.
Just give us a sense of how it works. If an opposition member sort of buttonholes you in the hallway, hands you a brown envelope and says, I think something's here. Can you follow up on this?
No, we certainly look at it and you know, we figure out what is at the root of it. One has to be cautious, of course, and you know, it goes back to good my training in science, verifying the sources, verifying the information from primary sources. But we certainly look at every one of those things. But see, in my legislation, there's actually, like Anne's, there's the ability for the public to require requests for investigations or a request for review of government policy or legislation or regulation. So that's sort of part of our normal way of doing business.
Okay, here's the bigger question. You are the overseers. Who oversees the overseers?
Who audits the auditor?
Who audits the auditor? That's the good question. And who oversees you?
Well, the courts, for example, you can, if I issue an order and the other party doesn't like it, they can take it to the Court of Appeal, and then the court can issue, we can do a judicial review of my decision. Now, this happens maybe 10% of our cases, maybe that's a little too high. We have a great track record. We often succeed in terms of our judicial reviews. And really, the ultimate arbiter is the public. The public is there to, and the world. I'll give you one example. We developed something called Privacy by Design. It's about embedding privacy proactively into information technologies and your processes and practices that you follow, networked infrastructure. And this last year, so once a year, privacy commissioners around the world get together at a conference. Last year it was in Jerusalem, and we voted as an assembly of privacy and data protection commissioners on privacy by design. It was made an international standard, unanimously voted in as the framework that the global commissioners want followed internationally.
Born in Ontario.
Born in Ontario, and that's why, you know, the Premier loves it. This is made in Ontario, privacy by design. We've put Ontario on the map. All around the world, they're following privacy by design. In EU, they're changing their data protection directive. It's got privacy by design in it. In the US, the FTC issued a report last year, privacy by design. This is all over the map. So the public is ultimately the one who judges.
You asked a good question. Who audits the auditor?
Well, we obviously get our financial statements audited by an outside auditor, but again, like I mentioned, I have a standing committee on public accounts. They were a very active committee. They meet every week. They probably meet 25, 30 times a year. So I really regard them as my boss. So I'm really before them every week, holding hearings, answering their questions. I get a pretty good sense from the Standing Committee on Public Accounts whether they're happy with the work that we do. I get a bit of a sense as to, you know, is the media and the public and the legislature happy with the work that we do? And, you know, I track how many times in the legislature the office gets raised, and I would say it would be very unusual for a day to go by in the legislature that a member doesn't get up either in question period or in a member statement and basically refer to the work of our office. So again, I get some kind of informal feedback from that if nobody was standing up and talking about my office, they're not interested. When at least every day somebody's getting up and talking about our office, I'd have to say there's a level of interest.
Okay, Jim, just between us. Remember how when Richard Nixon was president, you know, he'd sick the IRS on his political enemies?
Yep.
Okay, if some cabinet minister gives you a rough time in the press or something like that, do you ever go back to your staff after hours and say, you know what, let's take a deeper look at this guy's budgets?
Oh, wrong commission.
Well, clearly, if we did,
answer
Steve,
that.
I wouldn't admit it on the air. But I mean, I get all kinds of requests from opposition members asking us to, you know, go in and do stuff. And one of the reasons we typically turn that down is I get a lot of requests from the public and from basically opposition members to do things. And if you start, you know, doing some and not doing others, you run the risk of being accused of, well, how come you're doing all the NDP requests and you're not doing the PC requests? So I think we have to find that balance.
But there is there's obviously a more serious question at the basis of this, which is you do have considerable powers and access to sensitive information, which in the wrong hands, not yours of course, could be potentially quite damaging. How do we make sure that you're not abusing your power?
I think that's a good question because I think that often we come out with our reports, and the last report we come out with, I mean, was on the front page of every newspaper. So with that kind of, should I say, clout, you know, I think you have to be very careful that you deal with the facts, you don't exaggerate, as I mentioned, you know, get into hyperbole, things like this. And the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, which is comprised of all members, I can assure you, if they felt I was overstepping the line, they do not hesitate to say, you know, Auditor, where are you coming from on this, or where are you getting your information? And from time to time, they do slap my wrist, and we do have a good discussion about, you know, are you going too far, Auditor? You're not going far enough. So I almost have that on a weekly basis before my appearances before the committee.
Okay, same with you. Who oversees you?
Well, on the financial side, of course, he does,
Yes,
but
all of us.
but every year. But on mine, you know, I don't have the same degree of authority. I don't make orders like Anne. I don't have the same clout. Really, you know, the Royal Environmental Commissioner is one of providing a voice for the environment and energy conservation in Queen's Park. And so I'm making recommendations. They do not have to be adhered to. So there's nothing is formal to be checked on. I can't influence events other than...
You have the power of embarrassment.
I do that. And so it really comes down to is, are my statements valid and accurate and supported? And in that case, if you look at my annual report, in the back, every article that is written in there, there's a response from as the other commissioners as well, from the ministry or ministries that it impacts and affects. So they have the right to challenge my facts, correct anything that's there, and state a contrary position. It may be well and good. So I make sure that it's always presented opposite my opinions or my analysis, is that the ministries involved or implicated in the situation have their say. So so people can look at both statements and make up their own mind.
You all know Adam Radwanski, who's the Queen's Park columnist for the Globe and Mail. Good guy, great columnist, who writes, this was about you actually, Mr. McCarter. For the most part, Mr. McCarter's latest report stays within his purview and provides a useful service in the process. But in one portion of that chapter, Mr. McCarter goes beyond his own first-hand research. In suggesting that green energy costs more jobs than it creates, he cites several international studies, ones that represent one side of a fairly heated academic debate. Auditors and other watchdogs are able to play a very useful, nonpartisan role in holding governments to account because their findings are seen as unassailable. And given the headlines they generate, the media are not eager to challenge that perception. But whenever usually restrained auditors move beyond examining the books to start cherry-picking international studies, there's a risk of eventually compromising some of their clout. Here's the question. Do all of you, from time to time, heaven forfend, succumb to mission creep? Jim?
I think there's perhaps a little bit of truth in that. I know on the green energy audit, I certainly got some feedback from the government in the sense that, auditor just, tackling the issue. Are you really getting into indirectly criticizing the green energy policy of the government as opposed to, sort of assessing, are we implementing it cost effectively? So from time to time, I would probably say in one of the 15 value for money audits that we do every year, I do get a little bit of pushback saying, auditor, are you getting close to the policy line? And as I mentioned before, I've got a standing committee on public accounts. It's got members from all three parties, and they're not a shy bunch of people, and they don't hesitate to if they think that I'm crossing the line to say, you know what, Jim, do you think you're crossing the line? And typically I throw it out and I say, let's have a talk about it. What do you think? This was my approach, but you think I've gone too far. So I think to some extent, we do get close to the edge sometimes, and the odd time, maybe we get slapped on the wrist and we bring it back a bit. And
you freelance from time to time?
Well, I can give you one that I'm probably going to be criticized for next week. A week Friday, we are holding an event. It's on Jan 27, International Privacy Day. We're calling it Beware of Surveillance by Design. If you want to go to realprivacy.ca, you can get the details. It's at Mars, downtown Toronto. Why are we doing this? We're criticizing proposed legislation that the federal government is going to be introducing. What am I doing? Federal jurisdiction. It's not my jurisdiction.
Outside your jurisdiction.
What are you doing? Why are you doing this? The reason I'm doing it, first of all, it has implications for Ontarians, and we form like 40% of the country, and it will require, get this, they want me to audit the proposed additional duties that they are imposing, and they want me to audit it without giving me any additional resources. Like, that's going to happen. But let me tell you.
Don't look at me.
Exactly, and don't look at me either. I've already written to the Attorney General of Ontario, to the Premier, so keeping everyone apprised. The reason we're doing this is it will restrict our freedom as Canadians and Ontarians dramatically, and someone has to speak up. There are some times when you have to speak up and take a stand for privacy, for freedom, and this federal legislation will be impacting that dramatically.
Why wouldn't your job rather be to call your federal counterpart and say, this is going on, this is your responsibility, you deal with it?
And of course I've done that, and I'm doing this with her blessing. So last year, all of the privacy commissioners from across the country signed a resolution that we sent to the federal government under Jennifer Stoddard's signature saying, we want you to reconsider this, to do this. They haven't done anything. We fear that with a majority government, they're going to push this through. I got Jennifer's blessing. I said, do you want me to do this? She said, absolutely. I want everyone to take action.
Is she coming?
We're acting. She's holding her own event. It's Jan 27.
Gotcha. How about you? Succumbing to mission creep from time to time?
Well, I think some of my critics would say yes, but from my perspective, the way it happens with me is that I'm mandated to stray into some areas where the science is complex. So, for instance, I'm required to report on climate change impacts and reduction of greenhouse gas for climate change. Not everybody believes that there is such a thing as climate change. I'm required, as part of my mandate, to look at biodiversity policy, biodiversity strategies, and those biodiversity strategies, especially with respect to species at risk, often cause or socioeconomic strife out there, and so people say, "What business are you?" Or they deny the need to do anything about an endangered species. Well, so it does take me into controversy. I like to keep my footing in the science and in the mandate as much as possible. There's no question, though, that there's pushback and there's areas, mostly because I'm working in a very complex area on the fringe of public understanding.
Let me pick up on one other aspect of Adam Radwanski's column there, and that is, journalists do love you people. And journalists love you people because they can rely on you people, at least once a year, if not more, to tear a strip off the government, which makes for an easy story and a great headline. Do you sometimes, Jim McCarter, get a bit of a free ride from journalists because they just love the fact that you uncover all of the scandals inside government spending?
I don't think there's any doubt that the journalists, it's one of their favorite days at Queen's Park when the auditor's report comes out. I mean, I often get calls like before a big report, such as an annual report or the e-health report, or possibly on the upcoming Orange Report. I often get calls from reporters saying, my editor won't let me book my vacation because we want to make sure it doesn't conflict with your report. So, I don't know about a free ride, but I think if the areas that we audit and what we report is of interest to the public, they pick it up. But there's been the odd year where there's not a lot of pickup, and I think what they're basically saying is, like, good work, auditor, but this isn't interest to my readers or to my listeners. So I think it depends on the type of work we do. You
got to admit, we're a bit sweet on you, though, right?
I think so.
Maybe not a free ride, but we're a bit sweet on you.
I don't think that's true with me.
Not with you?
No, I'm getting all sorts of pushback.
No, why would that be?
I offend certain business community paradigms. Neoclassical economists don't always agree with some of the things I recommend. Actually, I have a friend that says that I should be sent to the Middle East because I'm the only person who can get a unanimous agreement between three warring parties on my recommendation on that we should look at road pricing, road tolls in Ontario. All three parties quickly denied, and much anger in on the talk shows on the radio and such things. So no, I do stray into some areas where the press will come after me.
But as we say in journalism, if we're getting everybody mad at us equally, then we're probably doing our jobs well. Is that how you see it as well?
Certainly in the legislature, I see that's the key. It's interesting on that particular thing that I broke the ice. I took all the flack for raising it, and the Toronto Board of Trade was in, other parties saying, by the way, yes, we agree, and so and we got the public discussion started at least on that topic. And of course, that's part of the role for an environmental commissioner, is to get the public discussion going, to be a voice for the environment at Queen's Park so somebody talks about it.
Gotcha. We've got a few minutes left here, so let's tackle one more thing. And you've had your job since 1997, I think. Gordon since 2000. Jim since 2004, but you were the deputy for 4 years before that. So you've all been around Queen's Park for a very long time. You've been watching them do what they do, protecting the environment, spending our money, protecting our privacy. Are things dramatically better today? People want to know. Are they better today than they were when you came into office? Ann.
Absolutely. In one sense, access to information it's more readily available. There are formal processes. Our jurisdiction has expanded to cover universities, and just as of January of this year, hospitals are now under FOI, 155 hospitals. This is all very good. Privacy, the government is actually not doing a bad job at protecting privacy. What concerns me the most is the insidious growth of mobile devices, communication technologies, ways that really encroach on privacy and require our vigilance.
Okay. Gordon, how about you?
Things are better. Things are better. The problems, the environmental problems are bigger. There's no question. And they're the problem of biodiversity, climate change, the effects of increasing energy prices. These are big international problems that are challenging like never before. However, the efforts of the Ontario legislature through 3 premiers have made things better. We are in a better position today than we were in 2000.
Last 30 seconds to Jim.
My sense would be we're looking at everything from hospital emergency rooms to daycare to long-term care homes. And I'd have to say, on one hand, we see some of the public services where definitely things are better. They're being delivered more cost effectively. But we still see an awful lot of instances, Steve, where things really need to be improved. We could be getting a better level of service for the money that we're spending. So I'd have to say it's a bit of a mixed bag. And I think the government's going to be challenged, as I've said, in the next few years, given the fiscal challenges, to maintain that current level of service, given the fiscal challenges we have. So they've got their work cut out for them.
No mixed bag for us today. We were delighted to have all three of you here. Thanks to the overseers, Jim McCarter, the Auditor General of Ontario, Ann Cavoukian, the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Gord Miller, the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. Thanks so much, everybody.
Pleasure.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.